Hi, it's Phoenix, and I would like to talk for a few brief minutes about the abstract expressionist painter Jackson Pollock. I recently watched a movie about Jackson Pollock's life, and I've always been taken by his abstract expressionist style. Watching the movie was an interesting experience for me because I was able to see some of the dramatic things that he went through, the dramatic feelings, the intense emotions, and it was very powerful, very intense. The movie was just called Pollock, and it seemed pretty accurate based off my limited knowledge of Pollock's life. I think that what's really heartbreaking about Pollock as an artist is that he really just wanted to push the boundaries. He really wanted to make an impact in the art world, and he wanted to do that as a human, for humanity, in a sense. And I think that that's very powerful, and I find it really troubling that, in terms of at least how it's depicted in the movie, that because art is such a finicky world and basically people can get away with whatever they want, it doesn't take long for even breakthroughs in art to become meaningless. And I think that that's a very complex and difficult concept and truth. I think it's very troubling. I feel like um, it doesn't seem fair that modern art has kind of taken this um, toll on the artist. So there's a lot of scenes in the movie Pollock that describe Pollock and his wife's poverty and just how they're not appreciated. And then there's a brief period where they're appreciated, but how that doesn't seem to last very long because it's modern art and because modern art doesn't last, suddenly Pollock is outdated, and because he's around snarky people that could care less about Pollock's intentions as an artist and what he really is setting out to do, he basically becomes antiquated. And Pollock existed in the 1950s, which was not that long ago, and they were already trying to make him outdated like a decade into his career, probably less, if I understood that statistic correctly. But I think what I take away from the movie Pollock and from my understanding of Pollock and also Pollock's beautiful abstract expressionist art is this very fluid and very magnetic, very kinetic way of going about art and going about painting. Um, it's very striking, the quote from his wife, another famous painter, who talks about how if you work from inside, you're destined to repeat yourself. And it's very interesting because that's been my fear, I have to admit. I can be very super conscious about um, my feelings on that. My feeling that maybe I repeat myself because I'm working from such a deep, intense space within myself that basically is just a broken record. And I hope that that's not the case. I do read a lot and study a lot in order to try to expand and broaden my mind. In fact, I recently listened to a podcast that described how literature is great for expanding the imagination. And because I read a lot and take art seriously, I think that I at least have some original ideas that I slowly work with and that slowly come into my writing. But I think that's an interesting quote. But kind of to go back to what I was saying about what I take away from Pollock, his art and his life, is just kind of the idea of perseverance for sure, and this determination to break through. And it was very interesting watching the movie Pollock because by the time he gets through his abstract expressionist style and he's painting and he's real in what he's doing, it's just this very fluid motion, just so natural. And you know it's got to be difficult. You know, sometimes we take abstract expressionist art very unseriously because we think it's easy, because it looks like just splatters across a page or a canvas or whatever. In fact, a friend of mine once called Pollock's work splatterpunk, which suggests that there's like no skill involved, but there is skill. And well, really, this little talk on Pollock isn't supposed to be a defense per se, but I think that I'm going to defend it just a little bit in the sense that, you know, these artists really are pushing the boundaries. Um, and I think that it's powerful. And I think what I take away is just kind of how sad it is that there's this intense pressure, this impossible pressure for the artist to push these boundaries. And I think what's really powerful is how that's juxtaposed with the artist's internal struggles, the artist's internal pain, such as Pollock, their mental torment, and their own desire to push themselves and to push their boundaries, and how that can lead to their breaking point. And in the case of Pollock, even to his death. And I think that what I take away from Pollock for sure is perseverance, as I've mentioned, and just this fact that if you believe in yourself enough, despite the turmoil that might be going on in your head, despite what you feel and the pain that you feel, you can do it. And it may sound like I'm on a pulpit. I hope not. It's not my intention. But I think what we can learn from Pollock is this determination. And I read a book that chronicled art from roughly, American art from roughly the 1880s to 1950s. And I thought that, again, Pollock's intensity and his intense subjectivity was pretty powerful for that time, especially when considering that right after that the minimalists came around and it was about objectivity rather than subjectivity. And again, I think of that quote, how if you stay within and stay internal, you're destined to repeat yourself. And how I honestly believe that. But how I don't think that that's bad. You know, I think that sometimes it's okay to be a broken record because it's who we are. You know, and that probably sounds ridiculous, and it is a little bit ridiculous. But I think what I'm trying to say with that is just the idea that in the end, you're not a broken record. In the end, it is a reflection of your experiences, your soul. And I think that that's very powerful. And I think that that's what we can learn from Pollock, is that it really doesn't matter if we repeat ourselves, because we repeat ourselves because there's this truth we're trying to get at. And I think that despite Pollock's tragic ending and the tragic ending to his life, he accomplished that. And it inspires me to continue to write, to paint if I was a painter, though I'm not. I cannot paint. But I can write. And that's what I hope to continue to do. And what I take away from Pollock is definitely just this determination and this desire to break through, and that by confronting yourself, ironically, that's when things become objective. And it doesn't matter if you're, you know, delving a little bit into surrealism or thinking of anatomism. I think that was the phrase. I don't know what that means, but apparently that was a phrase that came out of it. If you're being Dadaist, if you're being, you know, just a whole bunch of stuff. Like, none of those formal techniques matter. And I think that's what's so ironic and so cool about Pollock, is that even though he was so subjective, he was able to make the form of art and the form of what art can be, and the canvas and the paint, the most important thing, in a sense. But also, on the other hand, you have his subjectivity, which he was very powerfully able to convey. So, yeah, so again, I've said this a lot, but it's because I'm kind of working through these thoughts. But I feel like what you can take away from Pollock, the biggest lesson you can take away is that no matter where we are in life, no matter what we're struggling with, no matter what we're struggling to try to comprehend, no matter what we're struggling to do to try to make a contribution towards society, it's always worth it to fight. It's always worth it to push our boundaries, our personal boundaries, our subjectivity, so that way eventually we can reach some kind of objectivity. And I'm very fascinated by the subjective-objective dichotomy, and how it's, you know, its role in the arts and its role in science. I think all of that's very fascinating. But, you know, I hope that one day I can accomplish something that Pollock was able to accomplish, and not so much as in his art per se, but in his life. Not the more gritty moments, you know, not his tragic ending, but that determination, that spark. That's who I hope to be. And so if there's anything that I can learn from Pollock, maybe that you can learn from Pollock, it's just this idea that we have this drive and we should follow it to the end. We should follow it to its logical conclusion or even illogical conclusion and get as far as we can and let nothing stop us. Whether we live in poverty, whether we live unsuccessfully, whether people don't even give a crap about our work, I think that's completely fine. Because I think in the end, what matters is the art. And I get in trouble for thinking this concept, but I feel like eventually our art can transcend our lives. I feel like eventually our art can expound universal truths. And that's what I look for in my writing. That's what I seek to do in my writing. And I think that's what we can learn from Jackson Pollock, who is, aside from Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Picasso, Matisse, perhaps, one of my artistic heroes, and of course Rembrandt, couldn't forget him. One of my heroes, and that's what I take away. So, yeah, thank you. This is Phoenix, and I guess I'll see you around.